I said, you do exactly what I said. And he said, no. I'm telling you. I'm not asking you. I'm telling you. You do exactly what I said.
Members of a so-called religious cult with a leader they call Jesus has had 3 of its followers arrested in the investigation of the murder of Sharon Tate and 6 others.
They called themselves the Family. They came and went, and the number varied from 20 to 30. Police said they were a pseudo-religious cult.
There's a revolution. We'll be here.
When do you expect this revolution?
Sometimes I feel I'm scared to live. Living is what scares me. Dying is easy.
Police apparently got their break in the Tate case when this girl, Susan Atkins, a member of Manson's family, was arrested in another Los Angeles murder and talked to a cellmate about the Tate killings.
Well, you guys are misinformed. I haven't killed anyone. I didn't break the law. Judge knew that. But the people didn't want to hear it. I've been an outlaw ever since I was born.
Welcome to the Tangent Podcast. Here are your hosts. Back together from their days on Court TV radio. On Sirius XM. Albert Wunsch the Third. Vinnie Politan. And the one, the only, radio legend, Glenn Jones.
Now then, our topic on this particular episode would be Charles Manson, the Manson family, which terrorized Hollywood, of all places, back in 1969. Now, I was too young to remember it really, but I heard quite a bit about Charles Manson in the years afterwards. There were made-for-TV movies. It, of course, was all over the news. And
I love the made-for-TV movies.
Oh, me too.
Yeah, because back in the old days, right? Like now they make really like good movies for streaming services, but back then there was like the movie and then the made-for-TV movie, which was, you know, a little lower budget. You had maybe some B-listers, but it was kind of fun because it was a little less. You didn't have to invest as much into it, and it was free on your television.
And it was an opportunity to see James Brolin and all the characters that would star in those particular movies. Do you remember the Doberman Gang? The Doberman Gang?
Yes, I do. I remember the Doberman Gang.
They were a gang of Dobermans who were trained to rob banks. And they would come into the bank and circle around the security guard, and they would deliver the teller a note, and they had little canisters attached to them that they would carry.
You're talking about actual dogs?
Yes.
Robbing banks?
Yes. It's brilliant. The dogs would return to the van that was nearby, pile in with the cash, and they'd go on their merry way. So it was one of my favorites.
Was this made up, or did this actually exist? Was there actually a gang of dogs robbing banks?
No, I think it was made up. I think it was made up.
Oh, I'll check. Okay. Oh, okay.
But the dogs
probably had all gave people ideas.
They all had names of famous criminals like Dillinger and
yes,
and Clyde and Barker and all that kind of stuff. So they all had criminal names. I think the movie was in the early 70s, like 72 or 73, if I'm not mistaken.
Which is around the time that Charles Manson went to trial.
Yes. Well, it was in the middle of the trial at that point, yeah. That was an interesting trial. You want to talk about a incredible situation. I mean, you had a lawyer who disappeared in the middle of the trial, who was representing one of the women in the case, one of Manson's women, and they found him dead. Mysteriously.
Wow.
Oh yeah.
Was it related?
Yeah. Well, they assumed it was related because there was a way to get the trial delayed. Okay, because they, and this guy was a little bizarre, and they found I think he was in a Volkswagen or something. They found it down by a riverbed, and he was dead, and they couldn't find him for a while. And then
was it a Volkswagen Beetle or one of those minivans that were popular?
I am not. I cannot be sure on that. I'm not even 100% sure it was a Volkswagen, but for some reason that comes to my mind. But
if it was down by the river, I would presume it's a van.
Well, there's a van down by the river.
You're going to park a van down by the river.
That's a valid point. But he he was probably murdered. They said they didn't say he was murdered. I think it's still listed maybe as a suicide.
Wow. So that caused what we call in the business a mistrial.
Well, it didn't work out that way. They were trying to do that, and it didn't work out as a mistrial. See, what was interesting about this trial was the fact that the whole essence of the case that Bugliosi had was that Charles Manson.
Who was Bugliosi? You're throwing names out there.
He was the prosecutor. Okay.
First name?
Vincent.
Thank you. You spoke the best part of his name.
Vincent Bugliosi, who did a fascinating study on the Kennedy assassination, by the way, which is something we could do at a later date. But he had this theory that Manson was controlling these women, and that he was, using mind games and had them doing his bidding, and that was the essence of it. Because Charlie wasn't at any of the scenes of the murders. Okay, he had no blood on his hands, but he was arguing that they were controlled by him. So what did they end up doing? They ended up...
Here's the question. If he's controlling them, is that a defense for them that we're being controlled by this man?
None of them used that as a defense. And none of them used that even with regards to when they were going up for parole. Because originally they were sentenced to death. And then what ended up happening was the death penalty was overturned in California, and they became... they had a life sentence with possibility of parole. So all of them had the possibility of parole. The latest one to be paroled is, and the only one is that how.
This is the part that gets me angry. Okay, you've got a death sentence, right? And there's a mess up in the law, right, for a short period of time in our country. So a bunch of people who were sentenced to death, the ultimate punishment, because they committed the ultimate crimes and they were the worst of the worst. Because some of these states only had death and life with the possibility of parole, a lot of these killers, like really bad killers, ended up being eligible for parole.
And don't forget, it made for great ratings on Court TV, because Court TV would cover those hearings every year. And Charles Manson, in those hearings, call me crazy, but at times he seemed to make a lot of sense. He would go off, but if you listen to him carefully, sometimes he could actually make very intelligent points. And they were dismissed, of course, because he was completely insane. But they made for great television.
Do you really think that when Charles Manson came up for parole, he actually thought he had a shot at it? Could you see him with his bunkmate just going, "What do you think about this time? A little too busy for me on this?" As I go in there and
we're a pastel. Pastel. That make me.
Is this too loud? Is this too loud?
Has my swastika faded too much on my forehead?
I mean, the one of the times that he went up for parole, he had been boiling water had been thrown on him because he and his cellmate were having an argument about the Bible. Now, what part of the Bible do you get to when you just decide that you're going to start throwing scalding water at somebody in the middle of it? So this is the kind of guy that Jonesy just said sometimes made sense. Okay.
Well,
and by the way, the lawyer who mysteriously died was Leslie Van Houten's lawyer, Ronald Hughes. Okay. He decides to go camping during a 10-day recess of the trial, and then never came back from the camping trip. And his cause of death has been always undetermined. They don't know if he committed suicide or he just died of natural causes. He was a big guy. Actually kind of looked like Jonesy. You take a look at a picture of him. And he, years later, some of the Manson people said that they were on orders. They had him killed. Okay, to try to throw a monkey wrench into the works of the trial.
How many people... So if you've got several people on trial for these murders, so how many people from the Manson family still existed? Were there dozens?
A lot. Well, you still had a number of them trying to do things to get into prison so they could be with the family.
Oh,
okay. I mean,
is that why Lynette Squeaky? Is that why Lynette Fromm tries to assassinate?
Who is out now? By the way, she's out on parole.
Well, you know what they should have
I
done?
think she's dating John Hinckley.
They should have just pulled the Otis Campbell, right? You get drunk and then lock yourself in the jail, like Otis Campbell did every week on Andy Griffith.
That's right. Well, you got to get, 3 hots in a cot. He's a happy guy. But what happened was that there were a number of individuals that were still family members that were picketing, in front of the courthouse, that ended up causing problems inside the courthouse and were banished by the trial. Then they started doing like walks on their knees in front of the courthouse. They had signs up. They were doing rallies in front of the courthouse. And these were all followers.
Yeah. And
imagine if Court TV had existed. Imagine if Court TV had existed back then.
Oh, it would have been amazing. I wonder how he would have done on social media, Charles Manson.
Oh, he probably would have been huge.
Pick up more on Instagram or Facebook or wherever. I mean, we're not. Are we seeing that now? Are there cult leaders that are trying to garner followers online? I'm sure. I haven't come across any that have recruited me personally.
Did you know that Charles Manson was once a Scientologist?
Wow.
Yeah. Whoa. He studied Scientology and completed some sort of 150-hour training for it.
I did not know that.
Yeah, he apparently tried a lot of different things, and then eventually found himself in the middle of the flower children generation. He also, when he moved out to Haight-Ashbury, he also went to a clinic there that experimented on the patients with LSD and methamphetamine as well. But he likely was already crazy because his first crime was setting his school on fire at the age of 9.
Yeah, that's problematic. And I think we need to focus on really what drove him, right, for these murders. To me, what I take away from the whole thing is that his motivation for all of this was he was a frustrated musician.
Yes.
And
he had a little bit of success. Is
that's a lot like me, and I haven't turned to murder yet.
Well, you're young.
Okay.
There's still time. Yeah.
I don't know.
But he lived with Dennis Wilson, or lived at Dennis Wilson's mansion while Dennis was away, because Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys was infatuated by him.
No, he's infatuated by the girls. Yes. Like what happened was, he picked up a couple of them for hitchhiking. And then they told him about this, their guy, Charlie, and that Charlie would really love them and love him and everything else. And then, he was like, was having these incredible orgies with these women.
Who was?
Dennis Wilson.
But Dennis Wilson,
is he the drummer?
He's the drummer and the only member of the Beach Boys who actually served.
And drowned. That's how he died. So he was a true Beach Boy. He's also heavily into drugs that ties into Charles Manson. But,
Dennis was the brother of Brian, though, right? Brian was the genius of the Beach Boys. He was
Brian, Michael, and
Carl.
Dennis.
I'm sorry? Brian was the main one, right? That's the one.
Yes.
Brian was the main one.
I mean, he was the Beach Boys. I mean, he's the one that
he wrote all the songs. But I mean, Michael,
he did everything.
And he was the big guy.
No, he was like the Mozart of our time. I mean, this guy was have you seen the documentaries on him? I mean, this guy was just like magical. I never realized it. I just kind of listened to the Beach Boys one way. When I watch these documentaries, I listen to it a whole different way.
And the Beach Boys actually recorded one of Charlie Manson's songs.
Yes.
But they didn't do it the way he wanted to, so he was pissed about that.
They didn't give him residuals or anything like that, or money. They paid him $100, gave him a motorcycle, and their reasoning for that was he had stolen so much from Dennis Wilson while he was staying at his mansion that they figured, well, there's your payment right there. But in a parallel universe, that could have went further. He tried to get a record deal from that. He recorded at Brian Wilson's studio with Carl and Dennis producing him. Those recordings are purported to be album quality, not demos, but were never heard. They went unheard.
And my understanding is that he just got frustrated with the entertainment business, couldn't break through, and that's why he was lashing out at Hollywood with these murders.
Well, it's the house that he went to, okay, that was Sharon Tate's residence, had been there was a record producer there that had the house before her. So he was PO'd at that guy because he had promised him that he was going to be able to get him some sort of a recording contract or whatever the situation was. The guy's name escapes me, but he was not there anymore. So going to the Sharon Tate house and running into those people had nothing to do with Charlie. They didn't know Charlie from Adam, and they didn't even really know the guy who had the house before them. So that was the situation that people seemed to think that Charlie was, revenge for not getting the contract. But then he goes to LaBianca, which makes no sense whatsoever, because the guy owned a supermarket.
Yeah, a nice couple that owns a supermarket. But Jonesy, do you hear Al is now referring to him as Charlie?
Yes, I noticed that. That's what he was always referred to as in the media and in the movies. I think the book might have even been called Charlie.
Really?
What should I call him? Vin Chaz? Should I call him Chaz?
Chuck.
Charles Manson or Manson. Like Charlie makes him sound like he's your buddy or something.
Like what he thinks he says, no, I'm only joining the club here.
Right, but I know you're friendly with some of these folks, like the son of Sam, but like I don't think you have that level of relationship with Manson.
DB? You're talking about DB on Son of Sam?
David Berkowitz. Manson reached out to Spector when Spector was in prison, if I'm not mistaken, because he saw him as he looked up to Spector as music producer.
That's a good time to get a hold of a record contract then.
Hey, it's been done before. There was a group at a Rahway State Prison that released some records in the disco that actually became moderate successes.
What was the name of that group? This sounds
Chain Gang at the moment. They did have an interesting name that tied into their background, but Rahway State Prison is a prison in New Jersey,
right?
And also the lifers were there. The Scared Straight program, or the people who were sentenced to life would take in troubled children on a tour of the prison and scare the hell out of them.
I got stuck going to that.
I went to that.
Oh yeah,
I went there once.
I went there. I was in the Scared Straight program.
So to get into the Scared Straight, do you have to do something wrong first, or do they just look at you like this guy? There's definitely a possibility.
I'm not at liberty to discuss that aspect of it, but I was sent there on behalf of a Superior Court judge in the juvenile court in Bergen County, and then what was even more interesting was that he told me from the bench that I was going nowhere in life and I was not going to be able to do anything, and that I better get myself scared straight.
Wow.
Hence the reason why he sent me there. Okay. And then years later, who's my evidence teacher in friggin' law school? Him. Okay.
He was very proud.
I'm going to mention his name. Okay. But at the end of class, he goes, Mr. Woods, can I see you, please? And I'm like, oh, Jesus, what's going to happen now? And he just goes, it's so nice to see that you actually went down the correct path and did something with your life. I'm very happy for you and very happy for your mom and everything else. And I was like, well, thank you very much, Judge. And that was the only A+ I ever got in law school.
Look at but he got take credit. He scared you straight, Al. He scared you straight.
I think Al would have turned himself around. Whether
I don't know. He was in the punk rap scene, child actor,
boys in the wood. That type of thing.
I went to the Scared Straight program, and the crime I committed to do that was I chose a course called Violence in the Community, a social studies course in college, and they took us there on a class trip. And So they probably gave us the light treatment, but they were hooting and hollering at the ladies as we walked by their cells, because that was a part of it. You would walk by all the cells, and they would hoot and holler at you, and
they were hooting and hollering at me. Believe me, it was very, very. And then that's when I learned at that point that I have that type of body that excites both sexes. So I was very happy to find that out. But
a bear.
But I ran into a guy there by the name of Popeye. Okay, only had one eye and was there in murder. And there was a kid, his name was Greg. I won't say what his last name was. And what happened was the first thing you do when you go in there, they go, take off your shoes, right? You got to take your shoes off. I'm like trying to untie it. The guy goes, take off your shoes. And so you just pull them off and everything else. And then this poor kid, Greg, was designated by Popeye to stack the shoes up, okay, on like a wall. Okay, so he had to stack them up, and he wasn't doing it quick enough. So every time Popeye would walk over, he'd knock the wall down and then start screaming at the kid because he wasn't doing it right and everything else. And this was just horrific. Absolutely. But there was a good lunch, which was nice.
A good lunch.
Nothing like a prison meal.
Oh, yeah. Nice tray, the whole 9 yards. Spork. First time I had a spork.
Spork?
Yeah, it's a spoon and a fork.
Right.
That's what they give you in prison. It was a plastic spork. Was it? And that's the first time I'd ever seen one. Okay, this was like...
You could turn that into a shiv, couldn't you?
I was getting ready. I was packing when I went in. Oh, my God, what a nightmare. At Rahway State Prison. Never forget that.
My brother actually served time at Rahway State Prison, and as a child, they would pile me in the car like a family trip. Where we going to stop at Roy Rogers on the way? I'd be like a little kid, and they would take me, and I would visit my brother in in a prison. And man, that is, you wonder why I became Jonesy, right? And the family would take me there at like 12 years old, 13, 14.
Wow.
Very nice.
To me, it's when you go into a jail, it's that smell. Oh, there's a certain smell that is just, I've never smelt it anywhere else. And
is it musty? Is it
it's like must? It's like a deadness in the air. It's awful. That's why I could never be a criminal defense attorney. I couldn't spend time visiting clients in jails.
It depends on the jail. I mean, like Rahway was like that. I mean, well, but like the county jails are not so bad. But but like Trenton State, I don't care what. Like Trenton State, you go in there, okay, that was the most horrific prison. I mean, that was even worse than Rahway. And you'd go in, and I don't care what the hell happened. You came out and like you had this like odor on you, in your clothes, in your hair, in everything. I mean, it was like eating a white manna hamburger. It's no matter what you do, you just had that smell on you, and just like you'd go into the office and they go, "You just at Trenton State Prison?" I go, "Yeah, that was me."
True story. I also visited Trenton State Mental Institute to visit my other brother. This is true. And I'd be like a little kid. I'd be like, we're going on a family outing. Oh boy, can we go to Roy Rogers first?
And also just said that Charles Manson said some intelligent things, Vince. Well, I'll tell you what, I'll keep them talking. You make a call, all right? And we'll get the authorities there. Am's Gray Quicklay.
You'd walk down this hallway, and there'd be these metal doors with there's a little opening, and arms would be flailing out to swing at you. And people would be moaning and screaming. And, I was a child, man. So maybe in a different life, I would have followed Charles Manson, the influencer, if you will. Rock star. You may have heard of it. He's our topic today. Well, then.
I actually am going to abandoned mental institutions.
Yeah, that's not fun.
Oh, we're running out? I'm sorry.
Yes, we are out of time for this particular episode. Join us once again when we return. I am Jonesy. Thank you, Vinny. Say goodnight, Al.
Good night, Al.
Thank you for watching the Tangent Podcast. Be sure to subscribe, follow and share the podcast with all your friends. On behalf of Al, Vinnie, and Jonesy, have a wonderful day.